don't you know it? I'm hardly heroic. Baby, let's roll it, 'cause I'm hardly heroic.
Hi everyone, we're back with another battle report. I have been making some great strides recently to get my Wargames club into historical wargaming. While I do very much enjoy fantasy and sci-fi wargaming, I'm also a big fan of history. I think anyone who enjoys something like Warhammer Fantasy would also probably enjoy playing historical wargames because they offer you a huge variety of real historical wars. Of course, Warhammer Fantasy is based in part on real-world history, so the intersection there I think is quite prominent. So I did a poll inside the group, and the Italian Wars was selected for our first foray into historical wargaming. The rules that we are using here are the Renaissance rules written by Andy Callan. They're simple, free, and have just enough flavor to give you a taste of the complexities and nuances of warfare in the era of Landsknechts and the early pike and shot. I have to admit that the Italian Wars has always been a fascination of mine, as it represents in some ways the last of the very old medieval way of doing warfare. This is, in many ways, the final time when knights will dominate the battlefield as they have done in previous centuries. Kings were found on these battlefields, and there was still this air of chivalry, and yet the Italian wars will also showcase the tremendous and growing power of gunpowder weapons like cannons and arquebuses. It's a great mix of the old and the new, of what was and what will be. So, while I would like to be able to completely replicate one of the historical battles, we have neither the time nor resources to do that. So, the battle that we are showcasing today is strongly inspired by history, but will make some deviations for the sake of our own convenience. We are, of course, going to be playing something inspired by the Battle of Fornovo. Fornovo was quite significant, but also not really. It's one of the first major pitched battles of the Italian Wars. It was fought in 1495 between France and a coalition of Italian city-states, the League of Venice. Naturally, of course, comprising Venice, Milan, and Mantua. Despite the French winning this battle, the strategic significance of this victory is relatively limited. Charles VIII, the King of France, had been seeking to expand his conquests in Italy, and naturally the Italian states were against this. So battle was joined at Fornovo. The battle itself was quite a large affair, about 10,000 men on the French side and double that for the Italians. Despite the presence of many cannons, cannon fire itself was quite indecisive and ineffective, possibly due to the rain. Either way, the two armies were drawn up on either side of the river Taro. Curiously, the battle was won by the charge of the excellent French gendarmes, probably the best heavy cavalry in all of Europe at that point. They had smashed into the Italian ranks after crossing the river and scattered them. Our battle deviates from history in a few ways. Firstly, we are fighting something of a precursor skirmish. We know that in history, very large pitched battles were often accompanied by precursor skirmishes. So, in our scenario, we are fighting something of that precursor skirmish. The Italians are in the process of drawing up their larger army on the side of the river. The French King Charles, informed of this, decides to send forward a vanguard to delay or disrupt the Italian position, which allows the rest of the French army time to maneuver into place. As a result, we have 4 players, 2 per side, in command. These are actual historical commanders that would have fought the Battle of Fornovo, but of course they didn't actually fight this battle here. So on the French left, we have Engelbert of Cleves, Count of Nevers. On the right is Marshal Guy, Pierre Rohan, and these are our historical French commanders. Opposing them are the Count Casaio from Milan and Fortebraccio di Montone for Venice. The river is anchoring the rear of the French, so it will be death or glory for them. They will either be able to succeed and push the Italians away, or they'll be defeated and forced to retreat across a river, which historically is not something that's easy to do. Both armies are roughly equal in points, although there are differences. The Italian army is larger, made up of larger blocks of mercenary pikemen and crossbowmen. The Italians also have more cannons, representing the fact that they have had time to dig into their position and they're fighting on the defense. However, the Italians lack for cavalry, which is of course historically something that they always struggled with, only having the light horse stradiots, who are Balkan mercenary cavalry. The French, by contrast, have a smaller army, but these consist of fearsome Swiss pikemen with supporting crossbowmen. They also have fewer cannons because, of course, they've had fewer opportunities to bring up the artillery train. However, as is typical of French armies, the pride of the army is in the cavalry, and its cavalry are out in force with large contingents of excellent French gendarmes. In real life, the heavy cavalry were key to winning this battle, so it'll be interesting to see if that can be repeated here. Unfortunately, due to an accident, I have lost the photos of the actual battle. I really do apologize for this. So unfortunately, I will have to use some diagrams to indicate how things went. To quickly explain the legend that will be used in these diagrams, rectangles represent pike blocks, ovals represent crossbowmen, diamonds are the cannons, and a filled-in circle represents a commander of some kind. Red, of course, represents the Italians, and blue represents the French. Our French knights are represented with rectangles that have dashed lines in them, and the Italian light cavalry are represented with cross-hatched lines. Some of the smaller units aren't represented on this map, so I've chosen to focus on only the most pertinent stuff. Some of the players decided to split some of their units into even smaller units for additional flexibility, but these units didn't actually play much of a role in the battle, so I've chosen to omit them. Of course, in any real fight, soldiers don't compose themselves in neatly ordered squares, but this is, of course, as a convenience for our purposes. So in terms of terrain, we have a hill on our left side of the battle, and this can be traversed, although slowly, and not by cavalry, and an impossible grove of trees on the right. The original Battle of Fornovo was fought in quite a flat open ground, but it was felt by the players that adding some terrain would improve the game experience, so we did. Like I said, this battle is inspired by history. It's not meant to be a full replication of the Battle of Fornovo. We are just taking Fornovo as an inspiration for fighting our own real historical battle, or at least an alt-historical battle, so that you have to keep in mind. So with that explained, let's actually talk about the battle. So at the start here, Fornovo did have quite serious rain, so we rolled for the severity of the rain in our scenario, and on the first turn it was decided that it would be a rainy one, which limited all of our ranged troops to basically half their normal range. As a result, like in the real battle, cannons would be very indecisive, and for the first turn they would be unable to basically shoot. So taking advantage of this, the French players decided to start the battle by moving aggressively forward. The Swiss pikemen, who are more professional than their Italian counterparts, were very eager to get to grips with their foes, and here we see this, that even though they're outnumbered, we're moving them forward. Importantly, the French cavalry are also moving far ahead on the left and right flanks. The Italian response to this cavalry movement is to move their own light cavalry to intercept. However, the light cavalry is not sufficient for displacing heavy cavalry, and even though the knights on the right flank are caught by the swift Balkan horsemen, and although they do fight ferociously, the knights hold them off and beat them back. On the second turn, with the rain clearing, the battlefield erupts with the sound of guns. Both sides fire their cannons, but fail to do any meaningful damage to each other. The crossbowmen also try to add their fire, but only a few minor hits are scored. This battle, it seems, will be decided by steel and not by shot. Based on the ineffectiveness of their ranged troops, across the line, all the soldiers are moving up to begin to fight. On the left flank, the Stratiots decide to concede and move away from the charge of the knights. On the right, the Stratiots are finally broken and cut down by the knights as they flee. A unit of crossbowmen tries to come and protect the cannon on the right flank, but this of course is not going to be a major impediment. In the center, that's where most of the action is. There are several fights that are erupting. Due to the alacrity of the French cavalry, or perhaps the sluggishness of Italian pikemen, 2 units of knights are able to exploit gaps in the line and able to deliver charges against the enemy ranks. Meanwhile, the main line of Swiss pikemen, which has been formed into a double block, moves to engage their Italian counterparts. The Swiss are aggressive, but because of the roll of the dice, the Italians are able to just about hold on in the center. On the next turn, things continue to get worse for the Italians. The knights on the left flank have now completely turned it, sending their light cavalry to flight. Pierre de Rohan, the Marshal Guy, his knights are shown with an arrow. Knights have managed to break through the lines of enemy crossbowmen and overrun into one of their guns, destroying them and, of course, taking the horses and knights off the field in a charge. His other unit have actually managed to break through one of the smaller pike units with a flank charge, sending them to flight and overrunning into an Italian commander, capturing Fortebraccio di Montone in the process. This commander is removed, and although it would normally send a morale shock through his side of the army, apparently his Italians are not as perturbed because nothing happens. All of his units remain in play. This of course leaves Count Gazaio as the only major Italian leader left on the field. The French knights will return later in the battle, but of course right now they're off the field, which is of great relief to the Italians. On the right flank, freed from the shackles of the Stratiots, the French knights will then charge into crossbowmen and then threaten another Italian gun. Things are not really looking good for the Italians on both flanks. Even though their center is technically holding, both of their flanks have now been turned. In the center, the Italians have more luck, with some of their remaining fire from crossbowmen mostly, reducing some units of the Swiss with their pikemen in the center still holding on. Of course, there is now a growing gap in their lines. On the next and most decisive turn, the knights manage to perform a rear charge on one of the few remaining Italian pike blocks, and this utterly breaks them. Another gun is captured on the right flank, and that sends yet another unit of knights charging off the field. However, at this point, the Italians have managed to rout a crossbowman unit of the French, and that potentially leaves Marshal Guy vulnerable, so he decides to move towards Engelbert of Cleves. With the defeat of the lost major Italian pike block, we played one more turn, but the cause was hopeless. The Italian position continued to get worse, and they continued to lose more and more. Therefore, we decided to end the battle. The outcome is a decisive victory for the French, capturing most of the Italian guns and defeating the majority of the Italian army, suffering only relatively light casualties in return. Also, importantly, we were able to capture an enemy commander and his standard, and that was a high point of the battle. In our scenario, the Italian vanguard is swept from the field, allowing the rest of the French army to form up to fight the real battle of Fornovo, with the French knights eager to repeat their amazing charges. It was really interesting to see that once the scenario had been set up, and played of course, the real historical outcome very heavily influenced the battle in turn. The Swiss pikemen are more professional than their Italian counterparts, so they were able to suffer a lot more than the Italians would. But the real decisive factor, of course, were the heavy cavalry. Once they were able to sweep across the flanks, the rest of the Italian army was subsequently easily defeated. I hope that you enjoyed this battle report. I certainly had a lot of fun playing it. Apologies again for not having any footage or photos. It was quite something to see, I'll admit. Remember to like and subscribe if you want to see more of these, and leave a suggestion about other historical battles or periods that you'd like us to cover in future. Thank you, and goodbye.